Board Club. Welcome everybody to I think the fifth, is it the fifth in our Superstudio lecture series for fall 2025. Today we have Karen Kubey, Assistant Professor of Architecture at the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design, University of Toronto. Karen's work is extremely important, I think, in North America and probably beyond that in discussing the human right to housing. And she's going to be presenting on that today. So welcome, Karen. Thanks for speaking to us.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this Superstudio. So I'll be talking about, this will be a talk in three parts, talking about research, pedagogy, and speculative design. So as Adrian mentioned, this starts with the declaration that housing is a human right. This is not just a slogan. The right to housing has been codified in international law since 1948 and has been law in Canada since 2019. And I argue that the way that we approach the right to housing and the housing crisis in general as a political and economic problem, or solely a political, economic problem, has failed, leaving millions of people across the Americas inadequately housed. The latest figure I heard globally is 2.8 billion people inadequately housed across the world. So I argue that beyond being a political and economic problem, which of course it is, the right to housing is architectural. So these are the 7 aspects through which the UN, OHCHR codifies the right to housing: security of tenure, availability of services, affordability, habitability, accessibility, cultural adequacy, and location. So the argument is you can make as many laws and policies and, incentives and zoning regulations, all these things as you want. Ultimately, how do you make sure a home is accessible? This requires architecture. How do you make sure it's culturally adequate? This requires architecture. And why approach the housing as a right? I love the quote of Eric Tars, who's a lawyer with the National Homelessness Law Center in the States. He says, when housing is a commodity, we have to beg for it. When it's a right, we can demand it. So I think it's important to lift up the work that is happening currently, historically, through speculative projects where architects and in collaboration with residents have worked toward the right to housing, work toward these aspects, and to learn from what's already happened and amplify that and work toward that right for everyone. So I believe that addressing the right to housing also as an architectural issue will move us toward meeting the human needs of residents and to respond to what is not only a political failure, but a failure of imagination. So I see this as, and now I'm sort of like looking at my students and sort of looking at the camera. Hi, guys. I'm here with my thesis students in person at Daniels. So I see this as an issue of spatial justice, a term coined by Ed Soja that basically means how social justice manifests in the built environment. And so his book is on the far right, and then you see I'm encouraged by this becoming a greater part of the discourse, including in this important recent book by Dana Cuff, Architectures of Spatial Justice. So who am I to be talking about this? I've been working, connecting architecture to housing justice for over 20 years. Started my career as a designer of affordable housing. And now came a couple of years ago from New York to the University of Toronto. And a lot of the stuff that I'm presenting today is an extension of research produced for a book I put out a few years ago, Housing as Intervention, Architecture Towards Social Equity. This is a collection of 17 essays from around the world. And it also, the focus on the right to housing actually started with my professional volunteer work. So I volunteer with American Institute of Architects. I run their right to housing working group. And we discovered that the American Institute of Architects declared housing a fundamental right in 2017. And it's also part of the code of ethics for architects, both in the States and Canada, to uphold human rights and health, safety, and welfare. So I believe that this also extends from our responsibilities as architects. I also used to run a nonprofit, so some of this comes from that. So there are two basic questions that form the basis for all of the work you're about to see. One is, what does the right to housing mean in practice? This is, I think, an especially important question in Canada right now. Yes, we have the law, but what does it really mean? We can go outside right now and see how many people are still experiencing homelessness, how many people have not, how that has not been manifest for everyone. Obviously, we're very far from it. So what does it really mean in practice? And then my question as an architect and an educator is, how can architects and other kinds of built environment designers contribute to this right? So looking at a bit of my recent research. So my recent research has taken the form of a Pan-American series of programs that argues that, this issue is a spatial one, that addressing the right to housing requires bringing together housing advocates with architects, with people with lived experience, and that it's important to share lessons across the Americas. So just the other week, we finished program 6 of 6. So in each of these cities, and I'll tell you what the cities are in a second, we have both a private roundtable that brings together people working on the housing issue from different perspectives who should be talking, but very often, actually always, are not. And then we also have a public lecture that typically brings together someone working on housing from a rights point of view with an architect. And so we started this a couple of years ago in Mexico City. Mexico is a really interesting place. So they've had the right to housing longer than any other country that I've worked in the Americas. They got it in 1917 as an outcome of the revolution. And now 70% of housing in Mexico is auto-constructed. So there are really important questions for the roles of architects in that context. Then we came to Toronto. You might see a familiar face here. Again, really, I believe, really important to introduce questions of the role of architecture as the country is really figuring out what this right means. So we had a private roundtable, and then our public lecture in that case brought together Leilani Farha, who's a former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing based in Ottawa, with Paul Karakusevich, whose firm does a ton of amazing work in social housing. He's based in London, but doing work in Toronto. So I should say that all of these talks are available online. And so then this summer we were down in Buenos Aires. As you may know, if you're following the news, Argentina is in a period of really extreme upheaval. I mean, that's always the case in Argentina, unfortunately, but it's even more so now under, the relatively new national administration. So for instance, I did my Fulbright in Buenos Aires, so I spent a lot of time developing a relationship with, high up people at their national housing agency, but now that national housing agency does not exist. So there's a lot of work toward privatization, et cetera. So really important questions, and also important learnings from cooperatives and other kinds of decommodified strategies in the past and present. And then we were in Brazil. This was really amazing. So, oh yes, and Argentina has had the right to housing since 1949, so a year after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So Brazil is a really amazing context. This is, I think many people around the world think of Brazil as being, Brazilians themselves think of the right to housing as being something that's really ingrained in culture. But in fact, it's only been, national law since 2000. It was loosely part of the post dictatorship constitution in 1988, but only since 2000. So in each city, I'm working with a local partner. In this case, my local partner was very brilliant, and he said, "You know who we have to have at the table?" When Lula, the current president of Brazil, was president the first time, as some of you may know, he was president and then he wasn't, and he was imprisoned, and now he's president again. So under his first regime, there was a scholarship program instituted that allowed kids living in favelas to be able to afford to go to architecture school for the first time. So what that means now is there's a generation of architects who grew up in favelas and are working in that context. So it was an honor to have several of those, including Esther Caro, who's here at the table. And then I was like super, super massively honored to have Carmen Silva. She's second to the right. She's head of MSTC, or the Downtown Homelessness Movement in Sao Paulo. And so she's experienced homelessness herself. And, one of the aspects of the right to housing is location. And she really, shows it through her own life, where, for instance, she could have been housed in the periphery of Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo, as you may know, is like 14 million people, super sprawling city. But she would rather, and she was, homeless in the center, because it was important to her, as is codified in the UN definition. It was important to her to be closer to different kinds of services and to her community. And now MSTC has inaugurated a series, not just inaugurated, but runs a series of occupations that turn, empty condos, et cetera, into social housing. So then more recently, last month, we were in New York. So in New York, people are pretty depressed about what's happening nationally in terms of housing. But this was just before the election. Maybe you all heard that New York just got a mayor who campaigned on freezing the rent. He campaigned on affordable housing, on lowering cost of living. So it's a mix. The mood right now in New York is a mix of depression and optimism. And I was really honored to have at the table, so that guy who just got elected, his name is Zoran Mondani. And we had at the table his right-hand housing woman, Sia Weaver. We had, homeless advocates. We had architects. It was a really amazing group. And then just the other week, we were in Los Angeles. In that case, I got to, oh yeah, and that was, anyway, I'll go a little faster. You can look on our website to see who the speakers were. So in Los Angeles, we had the honor of collaborating with Dana Cuff, who's with the City Lab at University of California, Los Angeles, or UCLA. So, the story there is the fires. There were fires, as you may know, a little less than a year ago. That exacerbated in a big way the already difficult housing situation in LA. So the question of how to rebuild is the big question there. And I think what's really amazing and gratifying about these events is we're having people, meet who hadn't before. So our two keynote speakers in LA were Ananya Roy, who's, globally really critical scholar on inequality, and Julie Eisenberg, a really important architect working on supportive housing designs in LA. These are like arguably the two most powerful people in housing in LA, but they never met. And this happens over and over again. So the hope is that these programs are catalytic, and that they help people to form relationships for future collaborations. And so these are this is an example from LA, but we were asking similar questions across all of the roundtables, the questions I talked about, and then also thinking about lessons from the past that we might be able to bring forward and what we can do with our international network. So please stay tuned. There's going to be a short essay from each of the 6 convenings published in Untapped, with a framing essay from me. So you'll get to have a sense of who was there and what are highlights from each of these cities. And I'll share, I realize I didn't include it in the, maybe I'll just do that now. 1 second, please. I'm going to share the website where you can find out more about this. One second. Okay. So if you go to that website and go to programs, you can see we have the programs of who was at all the cities. I think LA and New York still need to be posted, but you can see that stuff. Okay, so I'm sitting with my class and I'm going to be talking about teaching. This is a bit meta. So last year, this is my 2nd time having the great privilege to co-produce with my students a thesis studio called Architecture and the Right to Housing. Last time the subtitle was A Practical Case for Radicalism. So this is a year-long, this is the 2nd time it's a year-long studio for 3rd year Masters of Architecture students. And I'm sitting at the table where we have our fall research seminar. And by the end of this course, students have a brief for themselves, individual briefs to drive their design work for the winter term. So students are invited to respond through, we started with collective research, and then they go into individual research, and then next term to speculative designs to these questions, right? What would the right to housing look like in practice, and how might housing projects and the design processes behind them contribute? So the subtitle Practical Case for Radicalism comes from A Planet to Win, Why We Need a Green New Deal. And this argues that so the Green New Deal is a concept coming out of the States that says, okay, the New Deal, was a scheme under Roosevelt that helped to, there were a lot of amazing public works projects. It helped to lift people as a jobs creation program, et cetera. So the Green New Deal asks how we could take those ideas, reinvent them for the current day, and also make them super green. So this is not focused on housing, but of course, climate justice and housing justice cannot be separated. So I think this is really important because the argument here is that, quote, an effective Green New Deal is also a radical Green New Deal. So the definition, of course, of radical means that it comes from the roots. So arguing that we must tackle root causes rather than merely addressing symptoms. So I use that to argue against this idea that either you're doing practical work or you're doing radical work. And to argue against this idea that if you're doing something, really forward-thinking and amazing in the context of school, where you don't have to, you can engage with different constraints, but not all of them, arguing that that's impractical, I argue against that. So anyway, so that's what we're looking at. And then I have another quote. So Naomi Klein, of course, a really important Canadian theorist, writes the foreword to this book, and she claims that historical leaps forward for society have been, quote, the products of dreams, invariably dismissed as impossible and impractical at the time, in times when people dare to dream out loud in public together. So this is no longer officially our subtitle, but as you can see, I'm a bit riled up about this idea. So yeah, we've had a good time. We had a good time last semester and this semester. This is rare. This is my only lecture this whole semester. Usually our typical course is run like a reading group and students lead discussion. And we purposefully, just like my roundtables, bring together different kinds of people. We look at literature from different sources. So just a reminder of our favorite 7 aspects of the right to housing. Students are asked to engage with these, and you can't separate them. You must deal with all 7, but certain projects deal with more, certain ones more or less. So I'm going to share with you 3 examples from last year of how students engage with this. So first is Home in Flux, Reclaiming Homes for Co-Living. This was designed by Jennifer Nguyen. And so I'm showing, so she's dealing with cultural adequacy, accessibility, affordability, and location, most of all. And her project comes from her own experience. She's the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants, and she did a study, well, she knew, but then she did a study of her own family, and then she talked to other children of immigrants. And over again, you see people who have to move over and over and over and over again and end up very far in the periphery because the housing stock in Toronto, which was not designed for our current multicultural city, does not accommodate, for instance, intergenerational ways of life and also different cultures. So she argues that the single family home is dying, but the single detached home is not. It's ready to be reborn. So she asks, what if we transformed what already exists? So hers is a renovation project. So she looks carefully, and students pay attention to this part. This is an important part. Okay, thanks. So she looks at the aspects of the right to housing that she's most interested in as they're codified by the UN. And then she adapts them for how she sees them manifesting for the people and location she intends to design for. So what does accessibility, what does cultural adequacy, what is location, what does affordability really mean if we localize these ideas? So then she's looking at how, the way that rooms are named, the way that they're meant to be used, is very different from the way they're actually used. So looking at how something like a kitchen is actually used in all these different ways by, people in her household. And so thinking about how architecture can be designed, not for the idea of how these different things are used, but for their actual use. So she produced a series of schemes. Again, these were renovation schemes. And she had different ones. She had done these amazing interviews with different children of immigrants and traced their paths. And so she had different schemes, but then some things became common. For instance, all of her renovation schemes included making the ground floor accessible, making an accessible bedroom and bathroom so that grandma can move in, etc. Okay, so that's one project. The second project is called Co-Care Lodge by Owen Mew. So the Co-Care Lodge, and here I'm reading a bit of his abstract. Co-Care Lodge responds to the urgent need for tailored, affordable housing solutions for Toronto's aging populations. Since COVID, many city-operated elderly care facilities have become under-maintained, with some facing demolition. So this offers a new intergenerational care-based co-housing model that reimagines the relationship between older adults, caregivers, and their families. So specifically, so that means that this is not only for older people, it's also not only, it's accommodating older people with different levels of health needs, and also has housing for caregivers and their households. And then importantly, my class has just been talking about the right to housing concept of location. Owen noted that it's a bit easier now for older people to live downtown because there's a lot of services, but there's more land and there's a greater need further out. So he specifically decided to work in that context and find a site that's there. So he really focused a lot on the common areas, and looking at what can happen to foster stronger community ties across roles and generations. And then here's a few of his renderings of what that might look like. Then last but not least, Balik Bayan, which is Tagalog for return home, is by Julia Bully. So she was looking foremost at cultural adequacy, but also affordability and location. So she's working in, this is housing that celebrates Filipino cultural identity and fosters community in Toronto's Little Manila. And looks at how people there are facing unaffordable housing and limited flexible spaces, but even within that limited context have created a vibrant hub. So what she did is, you can see, it was a prolific, she had a wild, she like a very prolific student. So what you can see hanging here, she did a lot of interviews with residents of Little Manila and also Filipino Canadians or Torontonians who lived outside of that neighborhood. So those are hanging here, all these different interviews that she did. And so she uses a limited equity cooperative model. It promotes multi-generational living, stability, and inclusivity. And I think what was important, she was looking a lot at traditional Filipino forms of housing, and then adapting them for a cold climate and for a higher density context. And so here's her model, and she's including different kinds of housing on one site. She was building on the site of an existing strip mall. So she, in her replacement, so she had a whole phasing scheme to allow businesses to stay in business, and her final scheme included retail on the ground floor. And here's some of her drawings. And now we're part of this. So we're very excited. I think we're all excited, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just checking. They're excited. So it's an amazing pleasure to be part of this Superstudio this year. So now my students have extra work to do, which is to say that they're meant to engage with the idea of the right to housing, and also think about how their project looks at, how they're engaging with one or more, up to 4 of the 4 ideas of the Superstudio: Indigenous solidarity, collaboration. Now I'm quizzing myself. Holistic quality, and oh no, I forgot the other one. Oh, decommodification, of course. So we're doing both, and I think we're having a good time. So now I'll spend the rest of my presentation going over one example of my own speculative design work. And then we'll try to go quickly so that we can have some time for questions. Okay, one second. Oops, okay. Okay. Okay, so I will be talking about a recent speculative design project called Aging Against the Machine. You can see Aging Against the Machine, yeah? Okay, great. Oh wait, but they can't. Oh wait, sorry guys. Now my students can't see. Okay, hold on everyone. Hold on. Okay. No. Okay. There we go. Okay, thanks for bearing with me, team. No. 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 Thanks for your patience, all. We deal with a little technical difficulties. Oh, man. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. It's not letting me put it on the big screen. Something is wrong. Okay, would you mind, Noel, could you turn it off and on just to see if that works? Any questions while we're dealing with our technical difficulties? I'm like, no, it's plugged in. Mhm. Okay, so you guys should go on the Zoom and then you can see. Okay, so someone find the Zoom link and share it with everyone. Okay, sorry, friends. Here we go. So that means I'll be without my notes. So wish me luck. Okay. Okay, thanks for your patience. So I'll be sharing a speculative design that I had the pleasure of working on. As you can see, I'm one name among many. This was a collaborative project, led by me in collaboration with Niraj Bhatia and Ignacio Galan, in collaboration with Todd Liebenbrown, Lindsay Goldman, Annie Ledbury, and David Peters, all represent different forms of important expertise. Annie and David are local to our site, and then a big team of others working on it. So the argument behind aging against the machine is that aging is not a problem to be solved. Rather, the issue is the range of barriers that are you guys okay? No. So if you look on, okay, you're getting there. Oh, is it not? Oh, can you let my students in, Adrian? My 4 students are in the waiting room. Okay, thank you. Okay, so aging is not a problem to be solved. The problem is the range of barriers that make it difficult to grow older with dignity, as we get older. All right, this is going to be really hard without my notes. Okay, hold on. No. Okay. Well, okay, I'm just gonna do my best. Okay, so this is a series of projects designed in solidarity with residents of West Oakland, California. So West Oakland is a majority Black neighborhood in the San Francisco Bay Area. And just to say very briefly, this is a site of, decades of disinvestment, a legacy of redlining. It's also the site of just, amazingly important historical and current fights for racial justice, for disability justice, for environmental justice, etc. So our role was to build on what's already amazing that's going on the ground. And this was designed we were one of 4 projects selected for a national exhibition a couple of years ago in New York called Reset Towards a New Commons. So each of the projects was put together by an interdisciplinary team and taking this idea of towards a new commons and localizing it. So here's some people checking out our the exhibition. So let's see if I can, Oh, it probably won't play the sound, which is okay. So rather than just having like a normal site map, we thought it was important to introduce our site through the eyes of residents. So what you're looking at is an excerpt from a tour we took with the Black Liberation Walking Tour, which celebrates Black histories and futures in West Oakland. And the woman you saw is someone, Annette, who successfully, with her neighbors, fought the bank that was going to foreclose against her, and was able to save her house and stay in West Oakland. And what you're seeing also is, so West Oakland, there's a main thoroughfare that goes through called San Pablo Avenue, and this is what the side streets look like where people live. So it was really important to us to do historical research, not just to check a box, but to be inspired by amazing history. So being inspired by the work of the Black Panthers Party, things like free breakfast and their demands around housing, and countercultural movements. And then this is really important. And my colleague Ignacio Galan does a lot of important research on this. The Center for Independent Living in neighboring Berkeley, California, was and is a really important headquarters for at least national fights around disability justice. They were important in the fights for curb cuts, etc. So thinking about the 10-point manifesto of the Black Panthers Party and all of these different social programs, this is the silver lining. Looking at what happens when there's massive disinvestment. What happens is community groups find grassroots ways to support each other. So a free breakfast program, etc. And these kinds of programs, sometimes the free breakfast program, for instance, started as a Black Panthers program and later was taken up by the government. But it's not just in the past that these amazing and important fights are going on. Currently, you have really important work happening in West Oakland and the Greater Bay Area. On the lower left, you see work to celebrate, again, Black histories and futures. And then you see Sparkett's Place, which is thinking about how to use vacant land for community uses. So looking at histories of redlining, looking at indigenous histories in the area, and you'll see how some of these ideas come forward into our schemes. Again, some thoughts from some clips from the Black Liberation Walking Tour. So it was very important to us to work in solidarity with local residents. Also, like many projects, there were constraints, especially around time. There was no way in the time that we had to produce this exhibition that we could, do the amount of community engagement that we would have liked to do. So what we did is we were working with the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, which has been embedded in community for decades. And so we built on their work and reviewed carefully a lot of the community engagement work they had done. We also did some of our own. We did our students were leading engagement with older residents of West Oakland. We also had a symposium that brought together lots of different kinds of people, including the landscape architect Walter Hood and local librarians, etc. So that was really important to us. And I think this is something that was really interesting. We're dorks and we were doing a lot of research, a lot of academic research. And for instance, we were looking at Silvia Federici, who argues that, we must look across generation at the aging issue. And so, you could have imagined a scenario where a Silvia Federici quote ends up in our exhibition, but we didn't need that at all because you hear the exact same thing from residents, right? When we said, hey, older West Oakland residents, what do you need? The first thing out of their mouths was, young people need, job skills training, young people need XYZ. So this idea of, anyway, over and over again, the ideas that come out of academic research, we were seeing also on the ground. And I should say, Niraj Bhatia, one of my partners, not only do we have local partners, but one of the main designers is local to the East Bay Area. And then what we wanted to do also is work against the idea that architecture can act or can or should act as a cure for different health issues. We were definitely not trying to reproduce these isolated ideas of how to deal, how to support older people. And I should say, the title "Aging Against the machine is neoliberalism and the forms of isolation it produces. So these are a couple of shots from the exhibition. It was also important to us to make it accessible to wide publics. And we tried to replicate our research project process in the way that stuff was displayed. So you're seeing here, for instance, research on the Black Panthers, next to, historical redlining maps, next to an example of a piece of corkboard that can be used. It's a better flooring for older people, next to our own models. And then on the back wall, we presented a series of 7 speculative designs. So I'll now share very briefly what we imagined as these speculative designs, and just, I'm doing these without notes, so be nice to me. So this is I'm going to start with my favorite one. So here, we're proposing 1,600 units of green social housing. So how do we come up with that number? How do we come up with the idea? This is localizing the homes guarantee, which is a national human rights-based platform put together by a coalition of 1 million grassroots leaders of color. So the national homes guarantee says, we're not working at the margins anymore. We need to end the housing crisis. We need to end homelessness. And the main part of their platform is producing or preserving 12 million units of green social housing. So I have no idea what 12 million means. I can't imagine that, but quick math says that's about 1,600 units in West Oakland. So this is a map, or a model showing real sites where about 1,600 homes could be built without displacing anyone. So this is only slightly upping the zoning. This is either on vacant properties or properties that for other reasons can be built without displacement. You're seeing this is the San Pablo corridor. That's the main street that runs through not only West Oakland, but other areas. And then, you can't separate housing from the environment. So I'll tell you a bit more about the street in another one, but I'll say, we heard it's, of course, the older residents we talked to are very diverse. The guy who had his headshot biggest, Mr. Williams, is very active. He's a biker, but he's scared to bike. It's not safe enough. There's not proper bike lanes, etc. So thinking about that. Then we were looking at, so this is looking at, big scale. What are we talking about? 1,600 homes. And I should say also, our schemes were always building off of what's really happening. So there's been over and over and over again, the proposals for a California housing authority. This would be a public housing authority at the state level. It hasn't passed, but we imagined that it had. So we imagined these homes would be controlled by the housing authority in collaboration with local groups like land trusts. So moving on to land trusts. So this is building on, again, what's already happening. So what's already happening is that vacant spots, this is the site of future housing, are being activated in different ways. And what's already happening also is there are land trusts in the Bay Area, and Moms for Housing is an amazing direct action group. These are moms who either are homeless or precariously housed, and they've successfully taken over vacant homes. So the idea is to build on that and have a land trust that's funded through a diverse array of funding sources, and that would serve to decommodify housing by decommodifying land and keeping it a trust. Then looking to the idea of newly built intergenerational housing. So similar to the student scheme I showed earlier, this is looking at housing that would be not only for older people, but also for caregivers. I went very quickly through our the people we worked with, but Lindsay Goldman is an aging expert, and over and over and over and over again, she said to us, listen, if you care about older people, you also have to care about caregivers. You know, right now they're having to commute massive distances in the very expensive Bay Area. Let's thinking about their housing needs as well. So then this is also building on the ideas is this would be developed by the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation. They're already doing intergenerational housing. We think we could take it a step further. This connects with labor struggles, mostly by women of color who make up the majority of domestic workers, thinking about that. And then on the interior, including a variety of apartments. Some are more traditional, including everything within a unit, and some are more communal, where some of your living room, etc., might be in a communal space. And this is meant as a prototype. This is, showing what it might look like on site. And it's also meant to be super green. So then we can't think about housing in isolation, thinking about access to healthcare. So we imagine a series of mobile vans that are funded by, there's many hospitals in the area, but they can be hard to get to. So we're imagining they're funded by the hospitals and run by local community groups. And I promised you that some of the historical research would come back. So here we're inspired by SAFE, Seniors Against a Fearful Environment, which was managed by the Black Panthers. These were a series of free vans. And we're inspired by, a lot of this work is happening on a small scale already, locally in the Bay Area. So we imagine that this could be, that these could offer various kinds of services, including health services, and then there would be areas for these vans along San Pablo and some of those triangular sites. So I talked about how even our most able-bodied, active, older person who we were working with said, listen, I'm scared to go biking. It is scary. And a lot of people mentioned fear about going outside. San Pablo's a very wide road, very scary to cross. So what we did is we imagined redesigning San Pablo Avenue to multiply the number of medians so that you're only ever walking 12 feet before you have a space to rest, and those would be greened, and those would, and those would also have services on them. So looking at how difficult it is to cross at this moment, and how, how it's really, there's a bus, but otherwise it's really car forward. So San Pablo Avenue has existed, the route has existed since time immemorial. And then this is a map from 1874 showing this. It's not only in West Oakland, but across the Bay Area. So this is looking at some of the so-called underwater sites that are worth less than what is owed by the bank. And this is showing, again, what's already happening, how some of these leftover spaces are being used, and a government proposal to redesign the roadway. So again, building off what's already happening and taking it just a step further. And then this scheme is looking at, I showed you in that initial video, how people live on the side streets in these 2- and 3-story homes. So thinking about, if someone needs a ramp, it can be expensive and difficult to build it on your own, but perhaps by, working with your neighbors, you could produce one ramp for something like 3 houses, and make them all accessible. So here's an image of what that might look like. And again, this is inspired by something historical. There's a book called Ramps Are Beautiful from the 80s, put together by the Center for Independent Living. This is meant to be a DIY approach. And again, this still exists. And then, these are interlinked struggles, right? The racial justice struggle and the disability justice struggle are interlinked, and that's no more. It's made most clear perhaps by the work of Brad Lomax, a Black Panther member who is also disabled. So, right, so thinking about those ideas, thinking about, as you can see, the guide was looking not only at building, but financing. So we're interested in what possibilities might create, because it produces a space underneath that might, allow for different kinds of new uses. And it produces, shared space that can be sites of, fun, sites of barbecues or whatever, and sites also of community care. And then last, I'm pretty sure this is last, looking inside. So thinking about, what does it really take for someone to stay in her home as she's older? So imagining a resident who needs more than one kind of intervention to stay in her home. Someone who's, having mobility issues, etc. So, but also financial issues. So we imagine a series of upgrades paid for by a local grant to make the home more accessible. We imagine that these are designed not in an institutional way, not like a metal bar, but for instance, something like wainscoting that also acts as a handrail. And then thinking about it, it's not just a physical issue, it's also a financial one. So thinking about this is the idea of producing a new accessory dwelling unit. And again, just like over and over again, we're building on what's already happening. So there's already a program next door in Berkeley where students are paired with older residents to be roommates. And we imagine that spreading to West Oakland, so that this person might get a roommate who could, help with daily tasks and also contribute to her income so that she can afford to stay in place. And this is building on, I had the pleasure of working on the Aging in Place guide for building owners for New York City. So we were building on strategies from that, and also noticing or noting or arguing or telling everyone that not everything, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are, with aging baby boomer populations, there are more and more products on the market that we can use, like these doorknobs that make it easier for people with arthritis to turn the door. So this is showing, this is showing like a lift. Or imagining, you might say, why not an elevator? There are things that there's other ways to address this that might be super expensive. So here we're showing a lift to help the person upstairs, and different kinds of strategies. And thinking about this, as someone thinking about upgrades, not just in terms of disability, but thinking about, cultural adequacy in this regard. So, yeah, I guess, to close, our arguments are that aging is not a problem to be solved. The problem is the range of barriers that keep people from living, full lives as they get older. And really being interested in building on what's already happening. Oh shoot, it's already 2:30. Sorry, guys. And the problem with my screens is I couldn't see what time it is. So, and if you want to learn more, Niraj, Nacho, and I just published an essay on our project in the architectures of aging in place. So I'll stop there, and it's 2:30. Oh, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Sure.
That was great. Do you have time for a few questions?
I can stick around for questions if people want to stick around.
I think we have a little bit of time. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good opportunity to pick your brain while you're after that amazing talk. Does anyone have any questions right away? Here? We do have a question here. Is that okay, Karen?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm very compelled by your last project of the wooden wrap, and because the project that we're kind of focusing on is mostly in Kensington and all about creating some community informal spaces. One part of your presentation really stuck out to me about the informal space that you created under the wrap. I'm kind of wondering what makes that specifically compelling to hang around in, because just looking at it kind of just looks like an unassuming little crevice, but wondering if you have the insight into that.
Yeah, I think it is unassuming. You know, as you can see, this is at a level of, you know, schematic speculative design. It's pretty, you know, it's pretty low level resolution in terms of design. But, you know, the idea is, so it's not very carefully designed. It's basically a gesture with the idea that this is a community that over and over and over again has, you know, found ways to come in together and to use different spaces, etc. So it was on purpose, designed at a low level with the idea that it would be, the real design would come from whoever occupied it. We imagined, you know, it could be a store, that, you know, like a, you know, something that sort of pops up. It could be a space to work on cars or to hang out for a birthday party, or it could be a lot of different things. So yeah, it's pretty low level resolution with the idea that the real design would come from residents.
You.
Celine.
Thank you for the lecture. It was a great talk. I just had a quick question. I guess kind of also based on your work that you did, that you just presented for aging, I guess, the machine. I guess, are you looking into doing more research based in Toronto now that you like live here? Or is it, because most of your research is based in the US, so I'm just wondering, like, is there anything that you're looking into doing, like more of a large scale proposal project, kind of like the one that you just proposed? Or is it just roundtables that you've been thinking of so far?
Yeah, the roundtables have been an insane amount of work. So I would say it's a real pleasure to work with students. Most, you know, they're allowed to do projects anywhere in the world. But last year, for instance, all but 2 students did their projects in Toronto. So most of my work in Toronto is through this class, honestly, and I teach also an undergraduate class on the history of housing. So that's my favorite way to engage with Toronto. We do a lot of readings that are based in Toronto. In a typical week, we do 1 Canadian reading and 1 from somewhere else. That's a bit, you know, it depends. And then, yeah, you're right that my focus has been broader geographically lately, specifically looking at sharing lessons across the Americas. So I guess what happened is, you know, when I moved to Canada, I first started to teach thinking about North America. And then because I had done my Fulbright in Buenos Aires, and because I'm very, very interested in housing rights struggles in South America, I've expanded that research to include South America as well.
Thank you.
What about here? How about in this room? Any questions in this room? You know it all by now.
I have a question, Karen.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed your discussion of the practical and the radical. And it's something that I'm talking a little bit with students here this morning about. because I think I'm also getting a lot of questions in relation to the collaboration with the Kensington Market Land Trust, like how realistic does this project need to be? How practical does it need to be? And I really appreciated your answer. That in a sense, we need to do both. Things need to be very practical, but they also need to be very radical. And I often think, and I think Architects Against Housing Alienation has often thought about the kind of possible impossible, like trying to work at the edge of the possible impossible. If things are completely possible, then why are we proposing them in a sense? Like anyone can just go and do them. If they're impossible, then why are we proposing them? Because we'll never get there. But there is a place, there is a sort of sweet spot, I think, in research and work where we're trying to make something that's currently impossible possible. So I thought it was similar, but I also think one of the things I really appreciated about your project is your constant reference back to activists. And I guess that's something also Architects Against Housing Alienation has been very insistent on, that we need to work with activists as architects. So there needs to be, so I guess the question I'd like to know from you, why that's important for you in your work and what you think that adds to an architectural conversation, and maybe how it resonates with the problem of the practical and the radical.
Sure. And I just put in the chat, so what I just showed is available as a digital exhibition. And you can also see the other 3 projects that were part of Reset Towards a New Commons, including David Gisson's project that's precisely on disability that I think is really important. So I think I want to share an anecdote. So I mentioned that we worked with the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation. And this is a group that started in the 80s, maybe. It's been around a long time. And it used to focus on Asian groups, and now it works with everyone in West Oakland. And, the person, our liaison there was, she was a tough sell, right? Like any nonprofit, they're really constrained in time and resources. Her own time is very constrained. So she thought, well, what's in it for me? What's in it for our organization? Why should we work with some architects doing speculative designs? And she ultimately decided that it was worth it because they don't have the bandwidth. They're putting out fires. They're figuring out what needs to get done tomorrow. They have, all these very, very real constraints. So they don't have the luxury like we do to think forward further. So that's why she wanted to work with us, because she thought that was important thinking that couldn't happen within those constraints. So I'll share that. Why is it important to work with activists? I think there's so many examples of the opposite not working. There are so many bajillions of examples, that's a technical term, of projects that sound really great, but if they don't, if your student was asking what's going to happen with that space under the ramp, I don't know, but it's designed to be taken over by local residents with local uses. So if designs aren't done to build on what's already happening, they're going to be a foreign object that's like doesn't work. So I think that's critical. And then I think the ramp, just like I'm arguing that the right to housing is architectural, I would argue that a lot of the aims of these activist groups can be supported and partially realized through architecture. So to support these demands, I think, is really important. And then the question about where to land in terms of something that can be built tomorrow under current laws, current financial constraints, etc., versus something that is like, built out of bubbles. I don't even know. We decided, as I mentioned, and if you look at that digital exhibition, you can see the real stuff. you know, we decided that we wanted to imagine a future that we could actually imagine happening. We could imagine the California Housing Authority passing. We could imagine, you know, the land trust movement expanding. We could imagine, you know, the Berkeley roommate elderly plus student program moving next door. And if we just put a few things together, we could have a very different condition for residents in West Oakland. And I think that was really, it was surprising to us as well, how easy it was to produce 1,600 units of housing, for instance. And we know that housing is not just a supply problem at all, but seeing that, you know, a future where, as the Homes Guarantee Group argues, that might be enough affordable green housing to house everyone in West Oakland. There's a lot of homelessness there. There's a lot of older people who are experiencing homelessness. It's horrible. So I believe that, you know, the future we want might not be as far off as we think.
Thanks.
Okay, maybe we should end there so I can hang out with my students a little bit.
Thanks so much, Karen.
Is that good?
Great talk. Yeah, really, really helpful.
Okay. Thanks for having me, and we had fun. Did we have fun? I haven't asked them yet, but I think we had fun. Yes, they're nodding. We had fun also in the midterm. So thanks for that.
Yeah, we did too. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
See you, Karen.
Thanks, everyone. Ciao, bye.